They drifted through walls, through thoughts, through time. The Kirill had no need for ships or tools. They were born invisible, silent, immune to detection, a species that evolved past light and sound. They didn't conquer planets with fleets. They dismantled them from within, thought by thought, system by system. 1,000 empires had collapsed under their invisible breath, and not one had known what hit them. Now Earth spun beneath their feet. Primitive, chaotic, inefficient, yet curious. And curious species rarely lasted long. One Kirill, designation Athek, hovered within Earth's orbital weapon station, buried just behind the retina of a woman named Elira Voss. She was a senior weapons engineer, young by Earth standards but unusually sharp. The kind who built warheads while humming lullabies, the kind who thought in layers. Athek liked her mind. It moved like fire and fog. He'd been embedded in her for 16 days. She hadn't noticed. None of them ever did. Athek's brethren were spread across Earth's high councils, data centers, research labs. Whispers, nudges, quiet decays in morale and memory. Humanity would fracture like the rest, quietly, inevitably. Yet something was wrong. Elira had stopped dreaming. Humans always dreamed. That's where the Kirill did their best work. But Elira's subconscious was locked down. Not sterile, not blocked, alive, but watching. Her mind didn't flow. It waited. She sat at her console, entering weapons diagnostics. Notepad open, coffee half sipped. Athek leaned closer, curving the pressure of his field just past her spine. A familiar dance, grazing thought, planting doubt. She froze. Athek paused. She wasn't reacting to the console. She was listening. Her fingers hovered, breath shallow, eyes narrowed. Then she spoke, not loud, not startled. Just 3 quiet words, barely more than breath. "I can hear you," Athek recoiled. It wasn't possible. They couldn't be heard. Not unless she had... No. No species had ever adapted that fast. He reviewed the moment. No recording, no transmission. Just her, speaking into silence with certainty. She didn't turn around. Athek stretched further, searching for anomalies. Neural implants. None. Surveillance. Negative. Psychic resonance. Flatline. But she'd spoken. Humans didn't bluff like this. Not when alone. Not without intent. He reached deeper, twisting perception, testing emotional response. But her thoughts were not reacting, they were baiting. She knew, she didn't just suspect. She was waiting for him to lean in. Athek withdrew, panicked, signaled the nearest node. No response. Signals scrambled, hive mind disrupted, jamming. No, they'd never encountered interference like this before. On her screen, lines of code began shifting, a looping sequence playing a phrase again and again. "We were never blind." Athek vanished. She smiled, still not turning, just sipping her coffee. And then she said, just above a whisper, almost affectionately, "Checkmate." They called. An emergency convergence across the Kirill network. Silent pulses bouncing through subspace corridors, converging in a chamber of thought no species could map. Panic had no place in their language, but its shape hung thick in the current. One of them had been seen. Not sensed, not detected, seen. This had never happened in the history of their evolution. They demanded a recount of data, frame by frame. Athek relayed the interaction, the human's tone, her stillness, the precision of her words. No implants, no implants. That detail repeated like a fracture line. A counselor suggested termination. Another urged full retreat. But consensus settled. On a middle path, they would monitor her, observe the ripple. If she was a fluke, Earth could still fall. If not, contingency protocols would be invoked. Back on Earth, anomalies multiplied. At first it was small, surveillance networks subtly reoriented, satellite patterns resynced. weather balloons launched in regions where Kareel nests had once clustered undetected. Irregular, but dismissible. Then, deliberate shifts. Human defense systems began injecting random logic spikes into their AI decision trees. Military communication patterns no longer followed protocol. Units began speaking in code that changed hourly. Earth's logic had cracked. It was embracing chaos by design. Elira vanished from the network entirely. Her presence, a routine in global data, suddenly flatlined. No credit card swipes, no facial recognition hits, no station access. Gone, and yet Kareel agents began dying. They were still invisible, still incorporeal, yet decaying from within. Panic took hold. Their whispers no longer passed cleanly through human dreams. Their targets flinched in empty rooms. Children cried at shadows no one else could see. Dogs barked at blank walls and refused to enter rooms the Kareel occupied. New research paper emerged from an obscure human university. The predator reflex, subconscious detection of unseen threats in Homo sapiens. Dismissed publicly, it nonetheless made its way into every global intelligence archive. Inside was a diagram. It mapped how humans respond to eye contact, even without eyes. The Kareel weren't being detected, they were being felt. Elira wasn't. A fluke. She was a trigger. The hive reeled. Never before had a prey species turned instinct into weapon. Humanity didn't need to develop new senses. They had remembered old ones. A whisper agent, stationed inside a deep-sea research dome, attempted to silence a human neurobiologist working on cross-species emotional resonance. Before he could act, the lights dimmed. A soft laugh echoed, though there was no speaker, no voice, just presence. On the screen, written in looping white font, were two words: "Your turn." The Kareel fled, and as they scrambled to adapt, the terrifying realization finally struck them. Not only had humans seen them, they were learning from them. Retaliation came fast, but not from where the Kareel expected. Humanity didn't deploy fleets or broadcast ultimatums. Instead, entire research hubs went dark. Communications from lunar colonies became encrypted in mathematically impossible patterns. A Kareel scout embedded in a Martian mining network reported strange behavior among the humans, rituals seemingly of randomness. Soldiers recited nursery rhymes before combat simulations. Scientists made eye contact with empty air and nodded. The Kareel had spent eons mastering control through prediction. They read behavior like equations: cause, effect, collapse. But humans had found the flaw in that system. They stopped making sense. From the ashes of whispered sabotage, Earth birthed something new: the whisper units. Human operatives trained in dissonant thought, guided by instincts rather than logic. Soldiers who could feel the subtle presence of the Kareel without needing to see or hear. They weren't enhanced with tech. They were deprived of it. Isolated for months, pushed to the edge, rewired to become predators of thought. Elira led them. She reappeared without ceremony, not in headlines, not in broadcasts, just a quiet return, walking into a covert outpost with a new uniform and a file labeled Cognitive Inversion Tactics. She'd known the Kareel wouldn't retreat, not entirely. Predators never flee a fresh kill without a final bite. But this time, Earth would bite first. The whisper units moved like myths, leaving no trace but spreading fear. Kareel agents were driven mad by simple loops of silence, bass audio tones that mimicked human breath at unnatural frequencies, walls painted with symbols that triggered primal fear. A species that thrived on manipulating others' minds was being invaded inside its own. One Kareel agent, stationed within a high-orbit relay, intercepted a strange broadcast. No coordinates, no data, just static, then a single voice. Elira's. "You thought you were gods. But gods don't blink." The station depressurized moments later. Across the Kuril sphere, consensus shattered. Whispers of human capabilities became rumors, and then doctrine. They weren't just visible now. They were hunting back. Entire nodes collapsed under pressure from psychological countermeasures. One agent, returning from a failed mission near Saturn, claimed to have been followed, not by a ship, but by an emotion. The Kuril had perfected fear as a weapon, but now fear had turned inward. Every room felt watched. Every thought felt mirrored. Their perfect invisibility was no longer a shield, it had become a coffin. Back on Earth, Elira stood in a quiet chamber beneath Antarctica. No lights, no sound, just thought. She smiled faintly, holding a cracked Kuril cognitive lens in her hand. They had mastered the art of the whisper. Humans had simply whispered back, louder. The retreat wasn't official. Kuril doctrine didn't allow for such declarations, but the signs were clear. Their infiltration nodes on Earth fell silent one by one. Whisper units roamed freely now, not in conquest, but in containment. They weren't exterminating the Kuril, they were breaking their will. In deep Kuril space, entire hives cut. Communication with their own kin to avoid contamination. Records were purged. Analysis threads erased, but the damage had already metastasized. Veterans who had spent cycles embedded among humans now suffered tremors in their thought fields. Some claimed to hear whispers when alone. Others began mimicking human language in their idle processes, muttering fractured phrases like "still here" and "we see you" into the void. The collapse wasn't material. It was conceptual. No civilization had ever fought the Kuril in their native domain, the mind. Yet humans, with their flawed meat bodies and volatile emotions, had done just that. Not by outmatching them in strength or technology, but by corrupting the rules of engagement. On a remote asteroid facility far beyond the Kuiper Drift, High Scholar Yethil reviewed the last transmission from the Earth front. It was audio only. Encrypted. He decrypted it slowly, ritualistically, hoping for tactical data, a mistake, anything to reverse the tide. It was Elira's voice. "You should have picked a species that doesn't stare into the dark for fun." Click. No threat, no warning, just a calm voice in the dark, stating a truth. The Kuril weren't afraid of death. They were afraid of the unknown. And now, humanity was the unknown, unclassifiable, unpredictable, not prey, not rival. Something else. Whisper units never declared victory. Earth never announced a war. But the Kuril began redrawing their maps with a wide exclusion zone, labeled simply Sol, an entire sector quarantined, not because of a weapon, but because of a question. What are humans becoming? Yethil deactivated the file and moved to delete it. Before he could, his station's lights flickered, though power was stable. An internal climate shift registered. And faintly, so faintly, he nearly dismissed it. He heard breathing behind him. He turned. Nothing. But on his terminal, 4 words had replaced the encrypted data. "We never stopped watching." He froze. Across the galaxy, the whispers spread. Not from humans, but from former Kuril agents, driven mad not by violence, but by being seen. The same sensory advantage that had allowed the Kuril to survive for eons had become their doom. They couldn't unfeel the eyes of something more primal than themselves, and so they left Earth untouched, not out of fear of destruction, but of exposure. The last lesson engraved in the core of every Kuril hive: never again mistake silence for ignorance, never again assume the dark is empty, and never, ever whisper to a human unless you're ready to hear them whisper back.